Believe it or not, but science has Christian roots. Why Christian roots? Almost every culture or religion has given rise to inventions and some form of technology, for you don't have to be a Christian to invent the wheel. But science and scientific exploration of the world around us is rather unique. It had to be nurtured in a culture with a Judeo-Christian tradition. The physicist Pierre Duhem had shown us already that the Roman Catholic Church had helped foster Western science during the Middle Ages, for mathematicians and philosophers such as John Buridan, Nicole Orem, and Roger Bacon. So science is not rooted in ancient philosophy. Aristotle and Pythagoras believed that the world is the way it is because it must be that way. Nature is supposed to dance to the tune of their philosophy. All planets, for instance, must move in circular motions because the circle is the most perfect of geometric shapes. They did not view the world as something waiting for painstaking discovery. Science is done in an armchair at that time. Although Aristotle did make some significant discoveries, his philosophical outlook was unable to nurture further scientific development. Science is neither rooted in paganism. Paganism views things as being controlled by whimsical gods and magical powers, not by laws of nature. This view blocks the road to science. If the world or nature is considered divine, as it is in paganism, some philosophies and mysticisms, then we would never be allowed to analyze it, dissect it, or perform experiments upon it, which would take away all incentives for doing science. When the Jesuits went to China centuries ago, they were amazed at the Asians' lack of progress in their understanding of the world. Science is not rooted in Islam. The God of Islam is entirely beyond human understanding. Laws of nature would limit Allah's freedom to act whenever he wishes to act. The philosopher Bertrand Russell believes that Islamic science, while admirable in many technical ways, was mainly important as a preserver of ancient knowledge and techniques and transmitter to medieval Europe. If Muslims did make some scientific discoveries, it was because they had been influenced already by the Christian perception of the world, centuries before Muhammad came along, and they are still surrounded by Christian achievements in science nowadays. The roots of science are Judeo-Christian. Because the Judeo-Christian God is a reliable God, not confined inside the Aristotelian box, not capricious like the Olympians in ancient Greek and paganism, and not entirely beyond human comprehension like in Islam, the world depends on the laws that God has laid down in creation. It is God's universe. Faith in a creator changes a universe with spirits, deities and goddesses into something rational. Nature is not divine in itself, only its maker is. The only way to find out what the Creator has actually done is to go out and look, which opens the door for scientific exploration. The Judeo-Christian perception of the world is very different. If you like science, God says, I wrote that. To hold that the world is created is to accept the two assumptions required for science, namely that the universe is not divine and that it's orderly and intelligible, through and through. A created world by definition is not divine but can be touched. It is other than God, and in that very otherness scientists find their freedom to act. There is no science without a creator. The Book of Wisdom says about God, you have arranged all things by measure and number and weight. By studying creation, we learn more about the creator. So science has Judeo-Christian roots. Pierre Duhem had to come to the conclusion that the mechanics and physics of which modern times are justifiably proud came from doctrines professed in the heart of the medieval schools. Alfred North Whitehead, the philosopher, told his Harvard audience in 1925 that modern science was a product of Christianity. they reacted surprised. The nuclear physicist Robert Oppenheimer, not a Christian, said Christianity was needed to give birth to modern science. All scientists keep living off Judeo-Christian capital, whether they like it or not, whether they acknowledge it or not. They should know that science requires certain assumptions. Science cannot operate without these principles as to what nature is like. For instance, a universe has order. Our universe has laws of nature. Our universe is intelligible. These are Judeo-Christian beliefs. Scientists who do not believe that the universe is intelligible and is grounded in law and order have cut off the branch they were sitting on. Scientists can't cut off the roots they came from, Judeo-Christian roots. So we live in a world of law and order. Like causes have always like effects. How come? Those are ruled by laws of nature. Where do the laws of nature come from? Apparently, our universe has order. The periodic table of the elements shows how orderly everything is organized when it comes to atoms. Scientists must assume that there is orderliness so that like causes have like effects. Science can never prove there is order in this universe, but they must assume it. The fact that scientific evidence can refute a scientific hypothesis is only possible if there is order in this universe. Without order, there would not be any falsifying evidence. So counter-evidence does allow us to falsify certain theories, but not the principle of falsification itself. Order is a given in science. We have to assume it. So we have a universe of order. Albert Einstein wrote in one of his letters, but surely one should expect the world to be chaotic. Well, it isn't. Our trust in a universe of law and order is ultimately based on our belief in a trustworthy creator God who created a reliable universe, not a haunted house or a bizarre fairy tale. We can orient ourselves in it, feel secure in it, and make plans for its and our future. The physical order we observe in this world appears to be amazingly consistent. Our universe also has laws of nature. Gravity is not just a good idea, it's the law. If the world were controlled by the whim of combative and impulsive pagan gods, then there would be no real laws of nature to discover. We live in a world governed by laws of nature, accessible to our minds and waiting to be discovered. How come this universe is law-abiding? Einstein said everyone who is seriously involved in the pursuit of science becomes convinced that a spirit is manifest in the laws of the universe, a spirit vastly superior to that of man. What a philosophical wisdom. So we have a universe with laws of nature. In 1872, the British philosopher John Stuart Mill promoted a rule that says it's a law that every event depends on some law. Whatever that law is, we have to discover them. Where does his rule come from? What are immaterial laws doing in a world of material entities? Laws are unlike anything else in this material world. Right in the middle of our comfortable, spacious, temporal, transient and piecemeal world of causes and effects, something pops up that we call laws of nature. They are spaceless and timeless. Besides, we have a universe that is intelligible. We can understand the universe. In the Judeo-Christian view, the universe is the creation of a rational intellect, capable of being rationally interrogated. A rational God has made a universe on which we can rely with our rational minds, made in likeness of God's mind. Scientists assume that the world is intelligible, otherwise there would be no need to pursue science. So intelligibility is definitely not the outcome of scientific research. It's in fact a proto-scientific notion that must come first before science can even get started. Our universe is intelligible. That's a very important assumption, a conviction that there is an intelligible plan behind this universe, a plan that is accessible to the human intellect through the natural light of reason. Einstein said the most incomprehensible thing about the world is that it's comprehensible. It may be incomprehensible to the scientist, even a mystery, but not so to religious believers, for they know why we can comprehend and trust this universe. It's only because of their trusting that nature is law-abiding and intelligible that scientists have reason to trust their own scientific reasoning. So science is an invention of Catholic pioneers. In the 7th century already, the English Benedictine monk Bede studied the sea's tidal currents. Around the year 1000, Pope Sylvester II had used already advanced instruments of astronomical observation. Saint Hildegard of Bingen, in the 12th century, was interested in the healing properties of plants and animals. Bishop Robert Crosetesti created the scientific method, including the concept of falsification. And then the Franciscan, Roger Bacon, introduced concepts such as hypothesis, experimentation, and verification. Without that, modern science would be impossible. And there are more Catholic pioneers, too many to mention. But let me mention at least St. Albert the Great. He discovered the element arsenic. He experimented with photosensitive chemicals. He studied astronomy and made orderly observations in anatomy and embryology. The concept of inertia, vital in Newtonian physics and in Einstein's general relativity theory, was articulated in the late Middle Ages, for instance by Thomas Aquinas. Aquinas also took up the problems of magnets as well as tidal variations and was intent on reducing them to natural instead of occult causes. In astronomy he voiced his expectation that Ptolemy's theory would someday be superseded by a simpler explanation. How right he was. So the question is, how could there be order in this world if there were no orderly creator? How could there be scientific laws if there were no rational lawgiver? How could there be design in nature if there were no intelligent designer? How could there be moral laws if there were no moral lawgiver? How could there be human minds if the universe were mindless? It could only be because there is a God, a creator of this universe. So the gate of science, believe it or not, is faith. I showed you already that Pope Sylvester II, through his faith, worked scientifically. St. Albert the Great was another one. They knew science is a faith-based enterprise. It takes faith to understand. Copernicus, Newton, Father Gregor Mendel, they were all faith scientists. They knew that it takes faith to do science. Louis Pasteur, Father Georges Lemaitre, who came up with the Big Bang theory, Max Planck, the quantum theory physicist. They all were living of Judeo-Christian capital and knew it. But later on, some of these scientists, not these ones, but the modern ones, missed the sign on the door, faith.